welcome to Tanner's Just Jets. Hello, Warbirders. Today's episode was researched and written by my collaborator, Tanner, who is a third-generation operational Air Force fighter pilot. And so she is an expert on jet technology, operational details, tactics, and weaponry. For security reasons, she can't narrate her stuff yet, but I'm very happy to share her words with you. In the late days of World War II, the United States was really starting to see jet propulsion-powered engines to possibly be the next big thing in aerial warfare. As air combat was rapidly changing at this time, they wanted in. Piston engines had hit a spot where their power was optimized, and the laws of physics prevented further growth. But what exactly is a jet engine? In a piston engine, or the usual propeller engine, within each cylinder, valves and spark plugs control the sequence of the 4 cycles: intake, compression, ignition, and exhaust. Notice that in a 4-cycle engine, the only stroke-producing power is the ignition one. In a turbojet, all of these functions take place simultaneously within the straight line of the jet engine. In the front, a compressor performs its job of drawing in and squeezing the incoming air and pushing it back, thus performing the intake and compression. And then the air is mixed with fuel, burned, and then it rushes to escape through the power turbine at the back. So, ignition and exhaust, otherwise known as thrust. The whole thing is joined by a shaft, so the faster the turbine turns, the more air is compressed at the front. It's actually much more simple than a reciprocating engine, and as thrust is being produced constantly, much more powerful. The USA was a little late to the jet party. Initially, the main participants were Germany and Britain. In Germany, Hans Oehlen had started with Heinkel, and his experiments had eventually produced the BMW 003 and UMO 004 engines that had powered the Me-262, amongst other Luftwaffe jet aircraft of the Second World War. Meanwhile, over in Britain, Frank Whittle's work eventually led to the Rolls-Royce Welland turbojet that powered the Gloucester Meteor. But still, the USA had been testing jet propulsion engines since the early days of the war. In 1942, the Bell P-59 Era Comet was no doubt flying, but the engines were not satisfactory as thrust was too low for the heavy airframe. As research and technology got better, closer to the end of the war, the jet option was looking a bit more viable, and the United States started putting out its first contracts. One of these was released by the U.S. Navy in 1945, looking for a jet-powered night fighter that would be able to take off and land on carriers. Well, one company that submitted a proposal was Grumman. In the late years of the war, Grumman had started dabbling in jet propulsion. When the word started to come out, the United States military was looking to start testing the use of jet engine aircraft. They stuck some early Allison J-33 engines onto an airframe that they were developing and submitted it as Grumman Proposal 75, or G-75 to keep it short. However, in April 1946, the contract was awarded to Douglas, resulting in the F-3D Skyknight, a 2-seat, twin-engine, radar-equipped jet that deserves its own video at another time. While not the outcome Grumman was hoping for, the U.S. Navy's Bureau of Aeronautics did give them a backup contract to build and test 2 of their G-75s, now known as the designation F9F. After they were built, Grumman came to the realization they sucked. With the early J-33 engine on the G-75 airframe, it did not produce enough thrust, making it extremely underpowered. And at this point, the J-33 couldn't get much better, and the airframe couldn't get any smaller. The engines were mounted on the wings, so there was already a chance of a small fuel load, and so it seemed like this was the end of the line for G-75. While perhaps the Navy Bureau of Aeronautics should have canceled it outright, they changed another one of Grumman's contract's wordings to include a new version of the G-75, which was called the G-79. At the time, as jet technology was so new, Grumman didn't have many options in the class of jet engines to go with this new version. The The two main engines in the US produced domestically were the Allison-made J33 centrifugal jet engine already used on the prototype, and the Westinghouse J34 with the axial compressor. The Allison-made J33 was being used by the U.S. Air Forces in the F-94 Starfire and the P-80 Shooting Star, the P-80 being the first American operational combat jet. The Westinghouse 34 was used by the Navy, powering the F-2H Banshee and the jet she was battling for position with, the previously mentioned F-3D Skyknight. So, if both the domestically produced engines are insufficient to meet your needs, what do? Go shopping internationally. The Navy told Grumman to use the imported Rolls-Royce Nini, which was developing successfully in Britain with the de Havilland Vampire and Hawker Seahawk. The Rolls-Royce Nini showed to produce 5,000 pounds of thrust compared to the Westinghouse J34 with only 3,000 pounds of thrust. Now, jet thrust sounds very complicated, but it's not. To break it down, 1 pound of thrust is equal to holding 1 pound of the object was attached to, suspended in the air as if the engines were pointed straight at the ground. Rolls-Royce gave the rights to build the Nini engine to Pratt & Whitney in the USA under the name J42. This would be provided to Grumman, and the G75 earned the name the F9F Panther, and she was off to the races. Although in some ways the Panther was a conventional fighter fitted with jet engines, for example, the wings were not swept, in other ways she had many upgrades. The Panther was of all-metal construction with a mid-mounted straight wing, tricycle landing gear, and a Stinger-type arrestor hook under the exhaust. The wing featured leading edge and trailing edge flaps, and the wings folded hydraulically upward from just outboard of the main gear. The tail assembly was of a conventional configuration with a mid-mounted tailplane. The main gear hinged in the wings to retract towards the fuselage, while the nose wheel retracted backwards. There was a split, perforated air brake just behind the nose wheel doors. The pilot sat on an ejection seat in a pressurized cockpit under an all-round vision canopy that slid backwards hydraulically to open. There was a small step on the lower fuselage that could be slid out to help the pilot to get in and out of the aircraft. Due to the J-42 engines being attached on the wings of the Panther and the cigar-like fuselage, the Panther had insufficient room for fuel in the wings. So 2 fixed wingtip fuel tanks, one on each wing, were added to supplement the 683 gallons in the fuselage tank. Close to the end of the Second World War, the Navy had switched from 50 caliber machine guns to 20mm cannon. The guns were placed in the nose. This allowed for more streamlined, accurate firing. A burst of 4 right from the gun sight. No convergence of the guns to worry about. The first XF9F2 prototype performed its initial flight on the 21st of November 1947, and although the second prototype crashed, there was no real delay to the program, and the Panther started to be delivered to the Navy in 1949. The Panther's initial role was that of night fighter, but the Navy soon realized air-to-ground was to be the Panther's bread and butter, and most airframes got bomb and rocket pylons. The F9F2P was fitted with aerial reconnaissance cameras and was used intensively on recon missions during the Korean War. The F9F3 was fitted with the Allison J33 in case the Rolls-Royce Nini ever became too much of a hassle, and she was the first plane fitted with bleed air, a concept that uses compressed air from the engine's turbine, turning it into a secondary power source, and can be used in many ways. Cooling the engine, cabin pressurization, de-icing, and on modern planes, it pressurizes the lavatory you use. For the Panther, it was used to add power to the engines, to keep from stalling when landing on a carrier. The F9F5 used the Pratt & Whitney J48 engine, which was an enlarged Rolls-Royce Nini, and was fitted for a K reconnaissance version, sporting a longer nose for more reconnaissance equipment. F9F5K, being redesignated QF9D, was essentially a zombie Panther, used as an unmanned target drone for air-to-air practice. Poor Panther. Deployed by both the U.S. Marines and the U.S. Navy, the Panther was mainly used in a ground strike role. Some of the assets she used for this task were 6 high-velocity aircraft rockets, known as HVAR, under the wings, choices of 100, 250, 500, or 1,000-pound bombs, and the not-so-tiny Tiny Tim rocket. The Panther first saw combat on July 3, 1950, 1 month into the Korean War, flying a ground strike mission taking off from CV-45 USS Valley Forge. As the Soviets and Chinese supplied more and more anti-aircraft guns to the North Koreans, the Panther started to get the job of taking them out. This caused a high cost for AA guns, but also for the Panthers. Besides ground strike missions, the Panther also performed reconnaissance missions, and while not known for it, she wasn't afraid to shabby up to a good old dogfight. In fact, the Panther has a very cool record that needs to be covered. Bearcat with me here. She scored the first U.S. naval kill of the Korean War, shooting down a propeller-driven Yakovlev 9 on July 3, 1950, only 6 days after the Panther flew her first mission. Impressive, huh? Just wait. While being inferior to the MiG-15 in many ways, disadvantages can become advantages in the hands of the right fighter pilot. Using the slower speed, they could get MiG-15s to overshoot, ending them up in a bad position in front of the Panther's 4 deadly Hispano cannons, and the MiGs would become mincemeat. The overall kill rate was 7 MiG-15s down for 2 Panthers, the first being shot down by Lieutenant Commander William Aden of Fighter Squadron VF-111, the Sundowners. After the war, she went on to replace the F9F Bearcat, performing with the United States Blue Angels from 1951 to 1955, being the Blues' first jet. The only other nation to operate the F9F Panther was the Argentine Navy, so shout out to them. Neil Armstrong was a naval aviator before stepping foot on the moon, and he flew the F9F Panther. In 1951, while flying low over a valley, he struck a wire strung across, causing him to eject from the aircraft. Speaking of astronauts, John Glenn also flew the Panther with the Marines. Famous baseball player Ted Williams also flew her. But here's one story that's only recently being discovered that is definitely worth the highlight. On November 18, 1952, 4 naval aviators, including Lieutenant Royce Williams, launched from the deck of USS Oriskany in the middle of a blizzard to intercept 7 MiG-15s that were flying towards their task group from the border of China and North Korea. Williams noticed 7 contrails, and believing these to be the target, he moved to intercept. So that's 7 versus 4. But then one of Williams' squadron mates had some fuel pump issues with his aircraft and had to return back to the carrier, being escorted by his wingmen. They did not land, though. They stuck around the carrier on a CAP, Combat Air Patrol. So now we're down to 7 versus 2. Just then, 2 MiG-15s swept down, firing at Williams and his wingmen. These MiG-15s had Soviet stars on the tail and wings, meaning Soviets had fired on U.S. aircraft even though they weren't at war at the time. Williams got orders to intercept them again before they could reach the aircraft carrier, so he and his wingmen caught up and Williams fired at the closest MiG, with Williams' wingmen chasing it. That's all the wingman could do because his guns were jammed and they would not fire. Now we're at 7 versus 1. But that first MiG had been hit and fell, helping the odds a little. Following this was a 35-minute-long, gut-wrenching, fear-rattling dogfight between Panther and MiG-15s, with Williams scoring 3 more kills after his first. He kept firing and firing until his guns ran empty, and only then did he start to return to the carrier. But he then noticed one last MiG-15 pulling up on his tail. But then Williams' wingman pulled up on his tail too, which spooked him. And that MiG-15 buggered off. It was finally the end of one of the longest dogfights in history. While returning to base, Williams noticed he had no rudder control. Luckily, he was pretty even, and the aircraft held that way for a landing on the carrier. Afterwards, the crew counted 263 cannon holes in the jet, showing the pure ruggedness of the F9F and the Grumman's famous Ironworks American engineering. Williams couldn't even brag about his score. The fight, which could have caused an international incident and a potential war with the Soviet Union, was not revealed. The records were scrubbed, and Williams was instructed not to talk about it. Even much later, when the incident had been revealed, and there was a move to get the Medal of Honor for Williams' achievement, there were few records to back it up. It finally took declassified Soviet documents on the Korean War 40 years after the engagement to definitely prove what had happened on that day. There are many still surviving F9F Panthers at museums, and one airframe still flying. As of the latest update on February 2025, Bureau number 123078 remains preserved, maintained airworthy, and is expected to continue its residency at the North Texas Regional Airport in Denison, Texas. Some noteworthy statics are the one at the National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola, Florida, hanging from the ceiling with 6 HVAR, and one at Lions Park in Costa Mesa, California, and VFW Post 1621 in Janesville, Wisconsin. And lastly, there is a replica of Royce Williams Panther on the USS Midway Museum flight deck bearing 4 MiG kill symbols. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the first episode of Tanner's Just Jets. I hope we did some justice on the F9F Panther. If you guys enjoyed this, please do your part, become a member of the channel, or drop a super thanks. If you can't do either of those, then please just like and subscribe or comment, or come say hi to me on X. It's really appreciated. Till next time, remember, there's always something more to this sport we call flying, so never stop dreaming and never stop believing. This is callsign Tanner, signing off.